Jake Thompson stood guard in front of the imposing government building, a seasoned security guard dressed in a dark blue uniform. Every night, he fulfilled his duty, watching life unfold beyond the gates while feeling trapped in a constant cycle of monotony. With a heavy heart, he drifted into thoughts of his past, a life once filled with purpose as a soldier, full of adrenaline and camaraderie. For 8 grueling years, he served in the military, protecting his country and relying on the skills that had been honed on the battlefield. But returning home, he found himself adrift, struggling to find relevance in a society that had seemingly forgotten him. The flickering fluorescent lights cast deep shadows across the vast hallways of the building. For Jake, each shift felt like a test of endurance, but he clung to the hope that one day he would break free from the shackles of obscurity. His responsibilities as a guard were vital, yet the anonymity weighed heavily on his soul. Powerful figures passed him daily, their lives overlapped like threads in a grand tapestry, while Jake remained the single stitch holding the structure together, invisible in their eyes. He watched as politicians and dignitaries strode past, their footsteps reverberating through the silence, the air thick with importance while he remained unnoticed. Every night was a constant reminder of what he was missing. Once lauded as a hero, he now found himself working a job that felt beneath him, manning the gates to a world he would never enter. As he stood there, thoughts of what if haunted him. What if he had taken a different path? What if someone had given him a chance to rise above this role? His fists clenched, aching with frustration at the unfairness of it all, but every time he dared to hope, reality snapped back to remind him of the hard limits he faced. The clock began to tick toward midnight, each second sliding by like grains of sand. Jake absorbed himself in his job, patrolling the corridors with a keen eye, ensuring everything remained secure, yet his mind continued to wander. That evening felt different. He sensed a change in the air, a charge that hinted at the unexpected. The whispers of a storm raced through his thoughts until faint revving engines interrupted the stillness. A convoy of black cars rolled into the building's courtyard, headlights cutting through the darkness. An electric tension surged within him. Jake recognized the cars immediately, the entourage of Donald Trump. Perhaps the most polarizing figure in recent history, Trump's presence loomed larger than life. He stepped out of his car clad in a sharp black suit, his demeanor exuding charisma and confidence. The sudden approach of such power sent tingles down Jake's spine, but as usual, he resolved to maintain his composure, prepared to salute and do his job like any other night. But that night, Trump lingered for a moment and, to Jake's astonishment, his gaze shifted directly toward him. Their eyes met, an unexpected connection electric and intense. Jake felt the world around him fade as he stood rigidly, heart quickening. The glint of recognition sparked in Trump's eyes, an acknowledgement that sent a surge of adrenaline through Jake. "How's your night going, officer?" Trump asked in a voice that held an intriguing mix of authority and genuine curiosity. Caught off guard by the unusual politeness, Jake hesitated, processing the gravity of the question. In all his years at the building, no one of Trump's stature had ever taken a moment to inquire about his welfare. "All good, sir," he managed to reply, a hint of disbelief seeping through. Trump studied him intently, his eyes narrowing as if searching for something deeper. "You served in the military, didn't you?" His question caught Jake off guard. There were no insignias on his uniform to indicate such. It was his stance, perhaps, the unyielding posture of a soldier that hadn't yet faded. "Yes, sir. 8 years in the army," Jake replied, an unexpected swell of pride coursing through him like a rush of adrenaline. Trump's nod felt like a catalyst igniting something within Jake, an implicit understanding flashing between them. 8 years is a long time. And now you're just here. Is that how you want it? The inquiry resonated deep within Jake, forcing him to confront a question he had pushed aside for too long. The reality of his situation shoved its way to the forefront of his mind with an undeniable weight. "It isn't easy, sir." His voice faltered, but a moment's pause encouraged him to continue. "I handle security for this building. I do my best." Trump's gaze sharpened. "Doing your best doesn't always mean it's enough," he said, the words striking like the clang of a gavel. "If you had the power to change the security system here, what would you do differently?" Jake blinked, stunned. The question felt like a test, but one not many would dare to answer. His instincts flared. He had countless ideas about improvements they could implement. Years on the battlefield had ingrained in him a keen sense of observation and assessment of risks, yet his hands trembled at the thought of expressing those ideas. Who was he to impose opinions on the very architects of power that walked past him every day? There are a few areas I believe could be improved, sir. Jake finally found the courage to respond, his voice steady despite the storm of uncertainty raging inside him. He shared insights about blind spots in surveillance cameras, weak checkpoints, and access routes he had noticed in the dark hours of the night. Trump's expression shifted from casual interest to genuine intrigue. Good. I'll be back soon. When I am, I expect to hear your thoughts. Before Jake could collect his thoughts, Trump had already turned and disappeared through the building's entrance, leaving him standing there, utterly stunned. His heart raced as echoes of their exchange swirled in his head. What had just happened? Was Trump serious, or was this merely small talk, a brief spark of interest amidst a whirlwind of people? In the following days, that singular moment replayed in Jake's mind like a haunting refrain. He felt like a flicker of light in a room drenched in darkness, aware of the immense potential being offered to him but struggling to believe it could be real. The thought pushed him to remain vigilant. It was no longer just a job, it was a chance to prove himself. Every night shifted from monotony to an intense preparatory mission. He researched modern security technologies, viewed manuals, and observed the daily routines of the elite moving behind those imposing walls. He jotted down notes on weaknesses, drawing from every ounce of training and intuition learned during his military service. Each task took on new significance, and as the days turned into weeks, he felt the shadows of obscurity lifting slightly. Jake couldn't afford to squander his opportunity. When Trump returned, he wanted to be prepared, ready to seize the moment he had never thought could be possible. The empowerment surged within him. A man once resigned to invisibility was preparing to stand at the gates and present his ideas, ready to rise above the mundane. Finally, that fateful night approached. Jake stood watch, clothed in tension and anticipation as the hour drew near. Would Trump truly return? Would he remember the man standing guard, or would he pass by, lost in the whirlwind of urgency that defined his world? As the clock ticked steadily toward the midnight hour, Jake steadied his breath, fortified by the thought that for once, he was on the precipice of something greater. Each tick resonated louder, a reminder that he wasn't just a guard, he was Jake Thompson, a soldier still fighting, a man with a voice ready to echo through the halls of power. And as the moment arrived, he felt ready to step beyond the shadows of his past and cement his place in a world that had almost forgotten him. The tides of fate were turning, and his heart raced with the knowing. It was time to seize the moment before it slipped away forever. Jake Thompson's heart raced as the clock ticked toward midnight. The anticipation of Trump's return was thick enough to cut. He could almost feel the weight of the opportunity hanging in the air. It was as if every moment leading up to this had been a series of carefully orchestrated movements, drawing him closer to this pivotal point in his life. The shadows that had once enveloped him were beginning to recede as he held tightly to the notion that he was no longer simply a security guard but a man ready to reclaim his voice. As the minutes passed in an agonizing crawl, the familiar sound of sleek tires rolling over asphalt startled him. A convoy of black vehicles pulled into the courtyard, the headlights slicing through the dark. Adrenaline surged through Jake's veins. This was it. Trump stepped out, his sharp figure cutting a striking outline against the night. Jake straightened instinctively at attention as Trump approached, the memories of their previous encounter flashing through his mind, the connection that had ignited his desire to reclaim his purpose. This time, however, Jake was not merely an observer, he was prepared, ready to prove that the man standing before him had more than just a uniform, he had solutions. Officer Jake, Trump greeted with a nod, a hint of recognition flaring in his eyes. Did you spend the last few weeks preparing? Yes, sir, Jake confirmed, struggling to keep his voice steady, propelled by a mix of determination and vulnerability. I've compiled a comprehensive set of recommendations based on vulnerabilities I identified in the building's security system. Trump's eyebrows raised slightly, an encouraging gesture that stirred Jake's hope. Let's hear it. But remember, time is precious. With the words resonating in his mind, Jake took a deep breath, combating his nerves. I've identified blind spots in surveillance coverage, specifically in the west basement sector, where unauthorized access is a risk. During my patrols, I noted weakened checkpoints and routes that could be exploited. If someone were to breach security here, that area would be the easiest point of entry. Jake felt momentum push him forward, adrenaline sharpening his thoughts like a honed blade. I recommend bolstering the existing surveillance systems with modern threat detection technology. Investing in motion sensors and access control systems would significantly reduce the risk of unauthorized entry. Trump listened intently, nodding as Jake spoke, expressions of interest flitting across his face. What else do you have? With newfound confidence igniting his voice, Jake pressed on, detailing each observation and suggestion, threading logic and statistics into his argument. He spoke of the need for rigorous training for security personnel, highlighting that maintaining high vigilance could mean the difference between safety and chaos. The key to security, sir, is not just in high-tech solutions but in the people entrusted with those systems as well. We need to engage the team, train them effectively to recognize subtle threats, and build a culture of awareness. Jake's passion sparked recognition in Trump's eyes. For a moment, Jake felt like he was no longer trapped within the confines of a building. He was laying the groundwork for a new kind of security culture, one that thrived on empowerment and vigilance. As he concluded, Jake shifted his gaze to Trump, waiting for feedback. The silence between them felt laden with anticipation, each second expanding like a balloon on the verge of popping. "I like what I hear, Jake," Trump finally said, his voice steady and firm. "You clearly possess keen insights. In light of this, I want to see real change implemented immediately." Jake's heart leapt, a spark of exhilaration igniting within him. "Absolutely, sir. I'll begin drafting a plan for implementation right away." But before he could bask in the victory of the moment, chaos erupted. An alarm blared through the building, slicing through the silence like a violent knife. The red lights flashed, illuminating the startled faces of everyone in the vicinity. "Security breach," roared the sound over the intercom, sending jolts of adrenaline coursing through Jake's body. Desperation and urgency threw him back into action. This wasn't just an alarm, this was a situation that needed decisive leadership. "Jake, you're with me," Trump commanded, his tone sharply authoritative. The gravity of the moment pressed down on Jake even more. There was no room for fear, only action. As they made their way toward the control room, Jake's thoughts raced. He had flagged vulnerabilities, but what if they had actually been exploited? What if someone had taken advantage of the very weaknesses he had identified? Reaching the control room, Jake's instincts kicked in. He scrutinized the security monitors displaying frantic scenes of officers scrambling across radiology rooms and dimly lit hallways. "What sector?" Trump demanded. "West basement," a nearby officer reported, panic edging their voice. Sensor motion detected unauthorized movement. Jake felt the ground beneath him shift. It was the exact sector he had flagged earlier. The realization pounded in his chest. If someone could breach that area, the plan he had set in motion would remain unguarded. "We have to respond immediately," Jake stated, finger pressing the button on his radio. "I need a tactical team to secure the west basement immediately. No one moves in there without orders." As confusion swirled around him, Jake felt a powerful surge of purpose. He was no longer a passive spectator, he was part of the action, guiding the path forward. His past training kicked in, the military discipline that had once relied on quick thinking and decisive communication. "Move now." Trump's voice cut through the chaos with clarity as he pushed forward, following the officers down the corridor. Jake sprinted behind, adrenaline pushing him faster as they approached the west basement sector. The alarms blared louder, red lights flashing like frantic signals of danger. With each step they took, Jake's senses heightened. The strategic maneuvers he'd been practicing made their way to the forefront of his mind. When they reached the entrance, Trump barked orders to the waiting team. "Spread out. Secure the perimeter, and I want to know who's in there." Jake stepped cautiously into the dimly lit room, sweeping the area with his flashlight. Tension filled the air as officers dispersed around him. From the corner of his eye, he noticed something moving beneath the electrical panels, an unfamiliar dark shape. "Over here!" Jake shouted, his gut twisting with urgency. Officers turned to him, their eyes wide as they rushed to his side. Bending down, Jake examined the panel and found a small device concealed amongst the wiring. This is some kind of unauthorized surveillance equipment," he gasped, adrenaline surging as pieces clicked into place. "They're trying to extract data or possibly take control of the security systems." Panic rippled through the room, but Jake held his ground, leading the team as they scanned their surroundings for any further threats. Trump hovered close behind him, grasping his resolve. "This is more serious than I thought," he muttered, his expression darkening. "If I hadn't brought you here, imagine the consequences." Suddenly, realization hit him with a startling clarity. This breach wasn't just a fluke. Someone had gained access to the specific vulnerability Jake had flagged. In that moment, everything changed. He wasn't just a soldier trying to reclaim his worth anymore. He was in the midst of a real-life battle, fighting for the security of not just the building, but the nation. While the team secured the perimeter, Jake turned to Trump with a newfound sense of purpose bolstered by fearlessness. "We need to track down who's behind this." Trump nodded, quickly mobilizing the tactical team to search for clues. "Find out how they got in. We dissect this breach. I want answers before the morning sun rises." Jake's mind raced alongside the ticking clock. He had to figure out the vulnerabilities and act fast. The responsibility of protecting the nation now lay firmly on his shoulders. Confidently, Jake formulated a plan, echoing the military strategies he had learned so long ago. "We should review surveillance footage from the past 48 hours, he stated, aligning his thoughts with action-driven resolve. "If we identify any suspicious movements, it'll guide us to the source of the breach. We may even catch them at it." The atmosphere shifted from panic to determination. Each officer drew together, uniting in purpose. Under the pressure of the unforeseen, Jake found strength would become the central point of not just a conversation anymore, but of decisive action. As they moved to gather evidence, Jake's heart raced with renewed motivation. It wasn't just about proving himself anymore. He was engaged in a mission quite unlike any he had faced before, a challenge worth fighting for. With every discovery and every piece of evidence, Jake felt more rooted in his role. The shadows had not only illuminated but transformed him, allowing him to step beyond the walls of his past into a future filled with responsibility and potential. The lines had been drawn, the moment had become reality, and as the darkness of the night stretched long, Jake prepared himself for the fight ahead, not just for his own redemption, but for the safety of a nation that had once forgotten him. The control room buzzed with energy as officers gathered around the monitors, eyes glued to the eerie flicker of footage from various security cameras. Each click of the mouse reverberated in Jake's mind, propelling him deeper into the urgency of the task at hand. There was no mistaking it, this was a significant breach, and the stakes had never felt higher. "Start with the south entrance camera," Jake directed, his voice steady and authoritative despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Faces turned toward him, the officers eager for guidance as if they had finally found their anchor in the chaos. As the footage began to play, Jake's heart beat heavier, pumping determination through his veins. The 3 cameras displayed a parade of cars arriving and departing throughout the day. With each click, they scrutinized the grainy footage, replaying each clip multiple times, searching for a point of entry. "Pause. Right there," one officer suddenly shouted, pointing at the screen. The grainy image cleared slightly as everyone leaned in closer. A group of suited individuals, their faces obscured, moved with suspicious precision. A chill ran down Jake's spine. That's just before the breach was detected. "Look, they've got something with them, a device." Jake's mind raced back to the hidden surveillance equipment they had discovered under the electrical panels. They were probably deploying that device to monitor activity, maybe fine-tuning it to access data streams. He squinted, forcing himself to observe the scene through the cool lens of analysis. Did we get a clear view of their faces? As the officer advanced the footage frame by frame, Jake felt sweat bead on his brow. They needed to identify these intruders before they got away. There had to be something, some detail that could help them unravel the conspiracy threatening their very foundation. "I've seen that vehicle before," Trump interjected, tapping his fingers on the table, his expression grave. "It belongs to a tech firm that recently sought contracts with the government." "Which one?" Jake asked, thoughts racing. "Newcrest Technologies," Trump replied sharply. "They've been pushing for security contracts in various federal buildings." The name struck Jake like lightning. He recalled hearing hushed discussions about Newcrest pushing boundaries, a firm rumored to operate too close to the fringes of legality. If this was true, it could mean they were entangled in something far more sinister than a simple data heist. "Sir," Jake said, grounding himself amidst the panic that threatened to resurge, "we need to investigate their recent activities. If they've breached our systems, it suggests a connected source." "Get me someone from the intelligence community on the line," Trump ordered, authority radiating off him. "We need comprehensive intel on Newcrest's operations, funds, contacts, everything we can find." While the team worked frantically to gather information, Jake's mind was also racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that tonight had unraveled the first threads of a much larger web. The tension felt almost tangible. It was the kind of energy that suggested something dark loomed just out of sight. They had uncovered a breach, but would it lead them to something more ominous? Time slipped away as they analyzed footage and contacted local intelligence. Jake couldn't help but review all the encounters he had had within the building over the past few weeks. Every face, every conversation. Had he unknowingly brushed against any agents of NU Crest? "We've got a hit," another officer shouted, breaking Jake away from his spiraling thoughts. "We've identified the faces in the footage." Jake's heart pounded as the screen filled with high-resolution photos of the security footage. 5 individuals, each picture marked with details from licenses and previous encounters. 3 of them were present for security briefings weeks ago, right before upgrades were said to be implemented, Jake noted. They were likely gathering intel, scouting weak points in our defenses. Trump leaned closer, eyes narrowing. "We may have a mole within our operations. This is more complicated than we thought. Gather a full profile on every individual. We need to know who they really are." As the team diligently worked, a strange familiarity washed over Jake. The tension within the room began to swirl, a sense of urgency forged by fear. He pieced together fragments from his past, the relentless pursuit of the enemy, the uneasy feeling of being hunted. The traits of the intruders resonated with echoes of a threat he could almost pinpoint. "Sir, I think I might know how they were able to access so swiftly," Jake began, recalling an internal meeting not long ago about procedures that were shared too openly among the staff. "If there was a leak in our internal communications, it would explain their knowledge of our schedules and protocols." Trump's expression solidified into one of severity. "You're suggesting someone, maybe even someone here, has compromised security?" Jake nodded, adrenaline surging. "It's a possibility we can't ignore. We need to question everyone who had access to that information and identify if anyone has been behaving suspiciously." The room fell silent as reality sunk in. Trust was a fragile web, easily shattered. Each glance exchanged between officers hinted at the dawning realization that security could be breached not just from the outside but potentially from within. "We need to set up a discreet investigation while we tackle this externally," Trump commanded, his voice steady but heavy with realization. "Gather the necessary teams and keep it quiet. I want to know who our enemies are before they know we're on to them." Jake felt the tide shift underfoot, the urgency of their task surged, fueling his determination. As the team mobilized into action, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the tip of the iceberg. There was more at play, a larger scheme unfolding, connected to the shadows lurking in their corridors. "While they track our internal vulnerabilities, I'll mobilize a containment unit to intercept them if they attempt to access any systems," Jake proposed, ready and eager to take on the challenge. "I can also put together a briefing for our personnel to be on high alert without raising unnecessary panic." Trump clapped a hand on Jake's shoulder, a gesture of trust that ignited a flicker of hope within him. "You're leading this operation, Jake. Your instincts have brought us farther than I could have anticipated. Use your connections. Reach out to anyone you trust." Jake nodded, a whirlwind of thoughts swirling in his mind. This was more than a job now. It was a cause, a chance to rise and rebuild everything he had almost given up on. He had earned his place in this battle, and in facing down the nebulous threats lurking within their walls, he would finally rewrite the narrative of his life. As the minutes slipped into hours, the team worked tirelessly, piecing together the puzzle. The evidence illuminated a complex network, weaving through connections that spoke of bribery and deception. Chase Monroe, a lead analyst in the cybersecurity department, emerged as a focal point. Her close ties to NU Crest illustrated a dangerously charming facade. "Let's dig deeper into her background," Jake urged. "If she has been communicating with our intruders, we'll need to cut her off. We can't afford any missteps." The dawn arrived silently, a pale light creeping through the tall windows that lined the control room, illuminating the fatigue etched into the faces of the officers. But as the last shadows faded, hope sparked brightly in Jake's chest. They were piecing together the truth, and with it, reinserting control where uncertainty had once taken hold. "Officer Thompson, it's time for the briefing," Trump announced, his voice steady. "Let's inform the staff about the breach while reassuring them of our steps ahead. They deserve transparency, especially during a time of vulnerability." Jake stepped forward, inhaling deeply, ready to uphold his new role. He had undergone sustained trial and tribulation, and within him, the shadows faded, leaving only a bright path leading toward the future. As he took his place to address the team, he was no longer just the man standing guard at the gate, he was a protector. In this new fight against deceit and betrayal, he resolved to remain vigilant, ready to pursue the truth, and finally turn the tides of fate once and for all. Jake stood confidently in front of the assembled staff, the dim fluorescent lights reflecting off the polished surface of his badge as he began. "Good morning, everyone. I know we had a lot of questions about the security breach, and I'm here to provide some updates and reassurances." The room was filled with concerned faces, each reflecting a desire for clarity amidst the uncertainty. "From what we've gathered so far, it appears that an external threat breached our systems, accessing internal communications and potentially manipulating security protocols. But I want to reassure you that we're doing everything in our power to investigate the incident, identify the perpetrators, and prevent future breaches." A hand shot up from the back of the room. "But how did this happen? Were we compromised from within?" Jake's expression turned somber. "We've identified a few areas of vulnerability, including a potentially compromised member of our staff. We're working to rectify those issues and ensure that our systems are secure." A ripple of concern spread through the room, but Jake pressed on, determined to provide answers. "We've also taken steps to enhance our security measures, including increased surveillance and enhanced access controls. Your safety is our top priority, and we're committed to doing everything we can to protect you." As Jake finished his briefing, the room erupted into a flurry of questions and concerns. But amidst the chaos, Jake noticed a figure standing quietly at the back of the room, her eyes fixed intently on him. Cheska Monroe. Jake's instinct screamed at him to investigate further, to see if there was a connection between Cheska and the breach. He made his way over to her, his movements deliberate and calculated. "Cheska, could I have a word with you?" he asked, his voice low and even. Cheska nodded, a subtle smile playing on her lips. "Of course, Jake. What can I do for you?" Jake's eyes locked onto hers, his gaze piercing. "I need to know more about your relationship with NU Crest Technologies. We've uncovered some suspicious activity, and I think you might be able to help us." Cheska's smile faltered for a moment, and Jake's instincts told him that he was onto something. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Jake's grip on her arm tightened. "Don't lie to me, Cheska. I know you're hiding something, and I need to know what it is." The room around them began to dissolve, leaving only the two of them trapped in a world of tension and deceit. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for Cheska's response, the fate of the entire facility hanging precariously in the balance. And then, just as suddenly as the tension had arisen, it dissipated. Cheska's expression crumpled, and she collapsed against Jake, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean to," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was in a tough spot, and they promised me a way out. But it was all a lie. They used me for their own purposes, and I don't even know what they wanted." Jake's grip on her arm relaxed, replaced by a sense of understanding. "It's okay, Cheska. We'll get through this together. But I need to know more about NU Crest and their plans. Can you tell me anything?" Cheska nodded, her eyes still welling up with tears. "They were looking for something specific. Something they thought was hidden here. But I don't know what it is, or why they needed it so badly." Jake's mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of information. He knew that he had to act fast, to stop NU Crest before they could carry out their plans. But as he turned to leave with Cheska, he felt a cold, calculating gaze on the back of his neck. It was a feeling he had grown all too familiar with, a feeling that told him he was not alone in this fight, and that he was in grave danger. Chapter 5, The Shadow at the Door. As Jake walked Cheska back to her office, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced around the empty corridor, but there was no one in sight. Cheska, however, seemed to sense his unease. "Is everything okay, Jake?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Jake forced a smile onto his face. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just a bit paranoid, that's all." Cheska raised an eyebrow. "You're being followed, aren't you?" Jake's eyes widened in surprise. "How did you know?" Cheska stepped closer to him, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been noticing it too. Since the breach, I felt like I'm being watched all the time. But I thought maybe I was just being paranoid." Jake's grip on her arm tightened. "You're not paranoid, Cheska. Someone is following us. And I need you to stay away from your desk for now." Cheska's eyes widened in alarm. "What's going on, Jake?" Jake's eyes scanned the corridor, searching for any sign of the shadowy figure. "Let's just say that things have escalated. We need to get you to a safe location, somewhere where you can't be found. Chasecar nodded, her face pale with fear. Where are we going? Jake glanced around the corridor once more, before leading Chasecar down a hidden side passage. Somewhere where we can lay low for a while. Somewhere safe. As they moved through the winding corridors, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being herded towards their ultimate fate. And he knew that they were running out of time. The sound of footsteps echoed down the passage, growing louder with each passing moment. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he pushed Chasecar into a hidden room, locking the door behind them. "We have to hide," he whispered, his voice trembling with fear. But as they waited in silence, the footsteps stopped right outside the door. And in the sudden stillness, Jake felt a cold, calculating gaze staring through the small window. Their pursuer had found them. The question now was, what would they do with them?